Hi, this is Craig Stocks here at Utah Desert Remote Observatories. You can find us online at utahdesertremote.com. And today I want to go over this data of the Eagle Nebula, which contains the famous pillars of creation. And we'll start in PixInsight just briefly, and we'll do most of our work with color mapping in Photoshop. So let's start first in PixInsight, and I'm not going to go through the WBPP setup and execution process. I've got other videos that go through that. But today I want to go over just briefly the process in PixInsight once WBPP has given us its bounty. And that gives us 3 color files for red, green, and blue. And you can see those were shot at 120 seconds each, which is the typical exposure I use when I'm really just after the stars. And then we have 3 narrowband images of sulfur, hydrogen, and oxygen. And those were at 600 seconds each, or 10 minutes each, which is what I typically use for narrowband with a monochrome camera. And of course, my process is constantly evolving, not as rapidly as it was a few years ago, but I would say that considering the constant arrival of new tools and new techniques and new ideas, if you're still processing your images the same way you were a year ago, you probably should open your mind a little bit and look around at some of the things that have changed in the last year. Not big changes, but there are some changes. And probably the one that is most obvious is the new gradient correction that was added to PixInsight a few months ago. So let's look at the process just briefly in PixInsight. The first thing I'll do is put the 3 red, green, and blue together into a color composite image. And I'll do that using channel combination. And I pull most of my steps from the saved process icons over here on the right-hand side. So I'll just grab the red and drop it into the red channel. Green goes, of course, in the green channel. Blue goes in the blue channel. And click the solid circle to execute. And it will give us a new image 7, which is our red, green, and blue image. And we're done now with channel combination. And in fact, we're done with the 3 individual blue, green, and red files. So I can close those. And let's just do a quick screen stretch to see what the color image looks like. And it almost always has a very strong color cast. In this case, it's a strong magenta color cast. And in order to see gradients, it's, for me anyway, it's hard to see the gradient when it has that kind of a severe color cast. So what I'm going to do is open up the screen transfer function tool and unlink the channels. And what that does is cause the screen transfer function to do kind of an auto white balance. And you can see there's really not much gradient, which is surprising because this data was captured around the full moon when there wasn't much else going on. You can also see that it's upside down compared to the way you would normally see it, but we'll fix that when we get into Photoshop. So I don't know that I need to do any gradient reduction. We can try gradient correction, and I'm just going to apply it using the default settings just to see what it looks like. And we'll see if it makes it better or worse. I'm not sure we really need to do much of anything with this. We'll see if it looks much different after. See, there's hardly any change with gradient correction. So we will just forge on ahead now. I would typically run Blur Exterminator for correct only mode, and then spectrophotometric color calibration to color calibrate the stars. And let's just very quickly run through those. So first I'll run Blur Exterminator set to correct only. So at this point I've run Blur Exterminator in correct only mode. Then I ran SPCC to get the correct star colors. And then I ran Blur Exterminator again in its regular mode. And so now we're ready to do a stretch. And I use the screen transfer function and then usually just tweak the sliders a little bit. And I want to be sure now that I have the channels linked, because we have color corrected the image and we don't want to change those colors. And I'm going to do a pretty dark stretch on this. And the reason I'm doing that is this image is primarily for the stars. I want to get nice, small, crisp stars that aren't blown out and aren't bloated. So I'm really looking at just the stars and focusing on getting nice, small stars. And we'll just go with that. Drag the triangle down to the histogram transformation tool and then apply that. And turn off the screen transfer function, so that is now our stretched image. The last thing I typically do with stars is boost the saturation. And again, I have a saved process icon for that that increases saturation with a curves function, and then it runs SCNR for green. Whoop, I missed a step. I don't want to do that yet. Let me undo that. We need to extract the stars. So first I need to run this process container that runs both Noise Exterminator and Star Exterminator. Then we'll enhance the stars. Okay, Star Exterminator is done, so now we have our stars only layer. That's where I want to apply the Enhanced Stars process container to increase the saturation. And now this is ready to save. And I'll save this as a 16-bit TIFF file. And I'm going to save it in my Eagle for Video folder. And save it as a TIFF. And I'm going to just add a qualifier that these are the dark stars. So these will be a little bit darker than the ones that I already have saved. And if you've seen my videos before, you know what I'm doing with PixInsight is really just going through the steps to prepare images for Photoshop. So the goal is to have stretched, nonlinear files that are in good shape for Photoshop. That means the stars removed and a good overall balance of tones. So let's look at our 3 narrowband images here. I'll just do a quick screen stretch. This is the sulfur, the oxygen, and the hydrogen. And again, these don't seem to have much of a gradient, so I don't know that we need to apply any gradient correction. So my process with these is going to be to run Blur Exterminator, do a stretch, and the stretch will be aimed at getting good overall tonal balance, something like this, so that we're not blowing out the highlights and we're not blocking up the shadows. We have good detail throughout and a good range of tones to work with in Photoshop. And then that just simply gets applied with the histogram transformation tool. And then the last step is to run that combination of Noise Exterminator and Star Exterminator on each one of these monochrome files, and then again save those as a 16-bit TIFF so they're ready for Photoshop. So let's jump into Photoshop, because that's really where I want to focus the video today. And I'll just go ahead and close this because we're going to start fresh. And if you've seen any of my videos before, you know the first thing I'm going to do is go to Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and we'll navigate to that same folder on the D drive, Astro, Nook 1, Eagle for the video, and I want to just go ahead and load all of these, and then we'll sort out which ones we want to keep and which ones we don't. And what this is going to do is load each file as a layer in Photoshop, and then we can use Photoshop's layers tools to add color, sharpen, combine, do whatever processing we feel like we need to do. And the first thing I'm going to do is rotate this whole image 180 degrees so it's upright. So I'll just go to Image, Image rotation, 180 degrees. And now it looks like what we're used to looking at. You never know for sure what order the layers are going to come in. It happened to load just the starless RGB on top. I don't think I'm going to use this for anything, so I'm just going to drag it down to the bottom of the layer stack for now. Next we have the stars, and we have both the bright version and the darker, more subdued version, which is probably the one I'm going to use. So I'm going to select both of these layers and put them in a stars group by themselves. And I can do that by selecting the two layers and tapping Control G or Command G on a Mac. And we'll just label this group stars. And we're going to put this in screen blending mode so that we can see through the black areas. And that just adds the stars on top. And I think I want to use the dark stars, so I'm just going to reverse the order here. So those are the darker stars. So they're a little bit less bloated. We're probably going to want to add more saturation. So we'll just anticipate. I'll add a levels adjustment in case we want to adjust the brightness or size of the stars. And then I'll add a hue saturation layer, and we'll increase the saturation of these stars. Sometimes the red gets a little overwhelming, so I sometimes have to reduce the saturation of red. These look like just a nice combination of blue and yellow stars, so we'll just go with this for now. So I'm going to collapse the stars group and then turn it off, and we'll focus on the narrowband. And they happen to have come in a good order. We've got hydrogen on top, oxygen, and then sulfur on the bottom. So just very quickly, I want to put each one of these into a group by itself, label it, and then I know we're going to add a levels adjustment layer, so I'll just quickly add that. And if you're on an open layer group and you add an adjustment layer, it will drop it inside the layer group. So there's hydrogen. We'll do the same thing with oxygen and drop an adjustment layer inside, collapse and turn it off. And lastly, the sulfur, and drop in a levels adjustment layer. And the next thing I want to do is try to find what's going to be a black level. And it looks like the blackest point might be up in here. This is using the hydrogen layer as because it has the best probably overall exposure. There's some areas down here that are darker, but I feel like I'm going to wind up lightening those up anyway. And the main part of the image is really up here. So let's drop a color sample. So if you go to the eyedropper tool and choose color sampler tool, and we want to drop it someplace that's going to be a neutral black point. And I think that's going to be up here, but I don't really know for sure. So a trick we can do, let's add a solid color layer, and we're going to add a black, just a pure black solid color layer. And I'm going to put it in subtract blending mode. I'm going to put it in divide blending mode. Now I'm going to put a levels adjustment layer underneath it, and this is all just temporary. And as I start to darken the background, you'll see areas that are going to black. So all these little black areas, those are areas that are turning black as I darken the black slider. And it looks like up in the image area, this is probably one of the darkest areas. Let's turn these off and see. So yeah, that looks like it. I can believe that. I buy that. So I'm going to set my color sampler right here in the middle of this area that is starting to turn black. So all of this was just to find a good reference location for a black point. And in fact, now we can just delete these two layers because we're done with those. Now, let's start with the sulfur. And what I want to do is start by setting a black point so that the readout over here on the red, green, and blue this is the info palette, and it shows, and you can change the method. So I have an RGB readout, a CMYK readout, and then this is the readout for 0.1 that we just dropped right here. The values on the left show the value currently at that location. The values on the right show with the application of this adjustment layer. So I want to drive these down to around 20, 20. So if I slide the black slider on the histogram over, you can see the black level starting to come down. And we'll take it down. That looks like it's getting awfully dark. I'm going to stop at about 24. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the oxygen. And you'll see it starts at 31. And we want to take it down to about 24. And then we'll do the same thing with hydrogen. We'll open that up, grab the levels adjustment, and we'll take it down to around 24. So now we have kind of a neutral black point right there in the image. So let's add some color. And each one of this is a color image, first of all, even though these appear black and white. It's black and white because each of the three color channels, red, green, and blue, are identical. And in fact, we can confirm that if we go look at the channels palette. We can see the red, green, and blue are all identical, and red, green, and blue together make a neutral color with no color cast to it. But we actually want color, and what we want is the SHO color palette, which is sulfur mapped as red, hydrogen mapped as green, because even though it's red, it's less red than sulfur, and then oxygen will map to blue. And the real easy way to do that when you only need three colors is, let's start with sulfur. It's putting out red, green, and blue. So you could think of it as putting out three colors. And let's say it's red, green, and blue. If we go to our oxygen layer, now it's putting out red, green, and blue also. And it's just replacing or covering up everything below it. But if we turn off certain channels, so if let's say we turn off the red, then that would let green and blue from below shine through. And we do that by going to the advanced blending options, and the quick way to get there is to double click on the layer group to the right of the layer group name, and that'll bring up the layer style blending options window. And if you have an RGB image, you can see here in the center, you have a checkbox for each of the three channels, red, green, and blue. Well, we want oxygen to be blue, so we want to turn off red and green. And now we have an image that's getting red and green from sulfur shining through, and then we're getting blue from this oxygen layer group. So let's go to hydrogen, and we'll do the same thing. We want hydrogen to be green, so we'll turn off red and blue. And just like that, now we have a SHO image with sulfur providing the red, and it's actually providing all three colors. Red's the only one that we're using. Oxygen is providing blue, and hydrogen is providing green. But now we can play with the individual colors. For instance, I'd like to see more red. So let's come down to our sulfur layer, and I'm going to add another levels adjustment on top of the one that adjusted the black layer. And let's just make the red brighter by sliding the sliders to the right, and then we'll bring the black slider back over so that we don't make the background too red. And then we'll do something similar with the oxygen. We'll brighten the blue, and when we brighten the blue, we may have to darken the blacks a little bit. And then I probably should have done that on a separate levels adjustment, so let me undo that. We'll add a levels adjustment, brighten the blue, darken the blacks, and then we'll go to hydrogen, do the same thing. We will brighten the hydrogen a little bit, darken the blacks. And now it really just becomes a matter of adjusting each individual color just based on what you want to add or subtract. So if we want to add more red, then we do that through the sulfur layer. And if it gets to be too bright, we can adjust the black layer to keep our background nice and dark and neutral. So this is, you could think of this as rough tuning the color. Typically, once you get it close, now I would say the top, the sulfur looks like it's too bright at the top and not bright enough at the bottom. So I'm going to do some local adjustments, and I'm going to do them by adding a burn and dodge layer to just the sulfur to start with. And so I just added a blank layer, and I'll put it in soft light blending mode. And what that lets me do is grab my brush tool and set the opacity to something like 10%. And now if I paint with white on this layer at low opacity, it will gently lighten that area. So you can see I'm bringing out more red. And then if I want to darken, I can just tap the X key to switch to black as my foreground color. And I can darken the top a little bit and even out the red and the blue in different parts of the image. And it looks like this black layer is actually driving some of this all the way to black, at which point it's lost. So let's go to the mask for this layer, and I'm going to just add black to the mask so that we don't darken the bottom of the image too much. And then come back to the burn and dodge to balance it out. So maybe something like that. And we may want to bring back more of our red over here. So the area that we chose to be neutral up here is kind of a local bright spot. So it may have been brighter than we really want. Let's look at our oxygen. Do we want to fine tune anything here? And I think it's important to try to keep all of the colors. So we have red, we have yellow, we have a little bit of green, cyan, some blue coming in. So if you, I like to have the whole rainbow of colors. Otherwise, the image winds up looking, very duotone. So that's a good starting point. Typically, then I would, between the top monochrome layer and the stars, I would add a global levels adjustment, a global color balance, and a global hue saturation. And I would use these then to fine-tune everything at once. Maybe something like that. If we want to adjust the color balance, we can fine-tune the color here with this color balance layer. If we need to adjust saturation, we can do that with a global hue saturation. And now let's add the stars. So I'll turn the stars back on. And those dark stars that we added give us nice tight stars that don't interfere with the visibility of the nebula. If I turn that one off, the brighter stars are underneath. So that's what it looked like with the brighter stars. You may like that better. That's with the dark stars. If you want to do a combination, because everything is aligned here, we can reduce the opacity of these dark stars and let some of that brightness come through. And that lets you kind of play with finding the best of both. So let's say something like that. And to me, that's looking like a pretty decent image. So this is probably a good place to stop. Just recapping, we produced 3 monochrome images for sulfur, hydrogen, and oxygen in PixInsight. And then we also produced our star images from the red, green, and blue. And we actually created 2 versions of it. We created a version that has kind of the default fairly bright stars. And then we also created a version that had much less stretched, darker stars. And then we're using a blend of those 2 layers here in Photoshop to kind of fine-tune and get just the color size stars that we want. And we've got good star color. I'm not seeing any problems with red stars, but if there are, we can go to the hue saturation and target just the reds and reduce the red saturation. And that keeps those red stars from looking like red noise. So this is a good place to stop. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, drop those in the comments down below. And as always, I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.